Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, David Hayes. David is a forensic psychologist and cold case criminologist. He teaches psychology, communication, and English at multiple post-secondary institutions, including the Michigan Department of Corrections. He is an adult education advocate and provides jury consultation services as well. And I'm really happy to share this conversation with you as we're going to dive into many interesting topics about communication, relationships, empathy, getting the truth, talking to different populations. It really is a fun conversation. He's going to talk about applying forensic psychology to all of our everyday conversations. He's going to share the power of conducting thorough audience analysis and psychological autopsies. We're going to talk about the power of in-groups and out-groups, why it's so important to respect people's power of choice, and so much more. It is a great conversation, and I can't thank you all for being here for another episode to listen to us today. Thank you. Please, while you're here, take just a moment, like the show, share the show, subscribe to the show, comment, leave us your feedback. We would really love to hear it. And also, please check out our sponsors. If you're interested in developing the skill set necessary to understand what people are thinking and feeling by recognizing changes of emotion in their facial expressions and body language, go to humantel.com. and enter the code Inquasive25 for 25% off their best-in-class training. If you're a professional interviewer and you are looking to network, provide great insights to, and get great insights from professional interviewers, then check out the International Association of Interviewers at certifiedinterviewer.com. It's where you can learn all you need to know about the International Association of Interviewers and all you need to know about the Certified Forensic Interview designation. It's all right there for you. And while you're online, please check out Inquasive.com for all the information you need regarding the programs our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, and HR teams in order to teach them how to uncover hidden value in every conversation. We really appreciate you being here for another episode. Thank you so very much. So now, without further ado, I introduce to you David Hayes. Good afternoon, David. It's great to meet you. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
It's my pleasure, man. When I was doing my research, getting ready for the conversation, one of the things that got me really excited and intrigued was all the different ways we can go with this conversation. For me, it shows all about communication anyway, but I love when there appear to be common threads that connect seemingly different communication contexts together. And I feel like that's the kind of conversation we're set up for today.
I fully agree. I think, the things that I work in and communication is the biggest superpower anyone can have. So, this is going to be good.
Cool. So a lot of times if I'm being interviewed, people will ask me, what's a certified forensic interviewer? Because the word forensic is in there and people see CSI and they have lots of questions and they want to make it to be whatever it is. So now I get to flip the script. You have a PhD in forensic psychology. So could we start the conversation by helping us understand, nutshell version, what is forensic psychology and how does that set of understanding influence how you communicate with people across all of your roles?
So forensic psychologist is, in its most simple terms, a psychologist that deals with criminal justice aspects. So dealing with forensic populations, prisons, courts, and police. So that's really kind of the in the nutshell what it is. The way that we utilize that is the same way that we can utilize psychology and communications and in any other sense. What forensic psychology is really kind of devoted to is looking at motivation and then determining why someone does the thing they do. Just like most psychology, like why do we do the things they do? And when I teach both psychology and communications, and I kind of tell people when we marry them together like this, it's the ability to be a little bit clinical when we're communicating and doing a really, really intense audience analysis with what we have. And that way we could change or adapt our speech or adapt our communication skills or our communicative value to that specific audience. So the more we understand the person as a person, the more we can be effective communicators to that person, in terms of like persuasion or disinformation or anything like that. From the forensic aspect of it, It's a lot of times what I do is I deal with like victim families, and being able, interviewing somebody or asking questions, straightforward questions, isn't always the best tactic when someone's going through some type of trauma. Same thing when you talk to someone who's committed a crime and they're in prison, or you're interviewing someone who is a potential suspect, or any of those things. The approach has to marry the audience analysis, and that way, the worst thing we can do is engage in miscommunication or approach someone in the wrong manner, which just shuts everything down. And so that's really kind of the crux of it right there. The forensic psychology deals with the criminal and police and court aspects of psychology, but it's really adaptable to audience analysis and communicative value.
Nice. I love so much of what you said there, and I appreciate the explanation. Thank you. Developing that ability to adapt to your audience. How do they need to be communicated with? That's people who can develop that skill set alone are way ahead of the game. And also, I mean, you didn't say this directly, but the direct path is often the path of most resistance. So if it's a victim, if it's a victim's family, if it's a suspect, if we go right for what we want, we're setting off landmines every step of the way. So great call outs even to get started. I love the phrase audience analysis. I love that. My interpretation is really analyzing who you're speaking with, what they're experiencing, what they need to feel, how to communicate with them, so on and so forth. But I don't want to steal it from you. So when you are conducting your audience analysis, I'm assuming again to figure out how to best connect with somebody, what are you focusing on or prioritizing as part of that analysis?
Calling it profiling, because it's not like a thing that really exists, but it's a thing that everyone understands conceptually. So it's kind of like that though. So if I know I'm going to communicate with somebody, and I'm walking in, and for example, before we started, you mentioned tutoring adult learners. You got to approach an adult learner in a specific way, because as you rightly ascertain, people are a little embarrassed to admit they need help. So the way I approach, for example, someone of American citizenship versus someone of like Ecuadorian citizenship is going to differ, because there's cultural context that we have to look at. So that social and cultural context is kind of the first part of the audience analysis I want to focus on when I'm talking to someone. Those are like big bucket things. Things differ by gender. If you're married and have kids, you're going to have a different cultural context than unmarried without kids, even if you're the same age. Where someone grew up and how someone lives is a direct result of that. So that's really kind of the first part of it. And in psychology, there's like a fine line that I run in between what's called behavioralism, so the study of behavior, and structuralism, which is the study of like how someone's really kind of built, and their environment around them and how that shapes them. And so if we can take as much information as we can from somebody, then approach that way. So that audience analysis goes to that. So, for example, if you're looking for something persuasive, and I teach in prisons, and a lot of times we start talking about how the food's terrible, and the prisoner, it would improve things immensely here, and good things would happen. And they're like, okay, so who's the person we talk to for getting better food? And like, okay, we talk to the state budget people, right? The state budget people. What's your approach to them? And their approach is usually it's the right thing to do. Okay. That's a good approach. It's the wrong approach for that particular audience, though, because that particular audience is so concerned with budget. The right thing to do isn't going to have much weight. So when we step back as communicators, and we could take the self out of it and say, all right, I believe this is the right thing to do, but my audience may not believe this is the right thing to do. So I'm going to have to adapt the way I think to them. So I generally tell them, all right, come up with 3 budgetary things that would benefit this if they increased the amount of money they spend on food. And they routinely come up with, healthcare costs will go down and incidents will go down. So staffing prices will go down. And so people start to think in terms of, all right, what I know about somebody is what I need to use in order to communicate to them effectively.
That's a great way to put it. 2 things there. Take the self out of it. And then what I know about somebody is what I can use to communicate with them effectively. You mentioned profiling at the beginning, and that word has taken on very pejorative meanings over the years, and understandably so. But if we're being honest, we profile people all the time, and it's not by race or age or gender. It's personality type, interests. There's all kinds of things that go into that besides the things that we shouldn't be doing to generate biases and bad decisions and so on and so forth. But I like how you talked about finding what's the priority to the other person. How do they need to be communicated with? And the budget example is a perfect illustration for it. So you mentioned teaching in prisons. You mentioned working in adult education. I'm sure there's some overlap there, probably in and outside of the prisons. You talked about talking to victims' families. And as I'm connecting dots that might not be there to be connected, I feel like there's some common denominators in connecting with people across what might seem to be very different settings, contexts. So if you are looking to connect with somebody in order to get them to open their mind to a new idea, and that new idea could be learning math, learning how to read, telling the truth about something I did, maybe sharing sensitive information about my loved one who's no longer alive that no one has ever told an investigator before. Like, we're opening their mind up to new ideas. I know you talked about the audience assessment. How do you approach people across all of these audiences to open up their minds to these new ideas?
Always goes back to this really effective audience analysis again. So if I'm in a prison and someone just got their GED in prison and they're going to start a college class, so I'll teach communications and psychology in the prison, and first thing I'd have to do, I'd have to assess where are they coming from. So if I've got a 45-year-old guy who grew up in a poor side of town, whose belief system firmly held through generations that they don't deserve to be educated, that it's not for them, it's not something that people like them do, and then the approach is going to have to be wholly different, because I'll have to know that I'm coming from that aspect of it and say, okay, so here's where you've been so far, here's the things that have happened at this point, and now we have to bridge this gap in order for you to accept what's happening right now. So we have to have that baseline of that audience, like the real structuralist, contextually important background information. If someone's coming to me that's not in prison, for example, an adult learner, and that person had a terrible time in high school, but just got sick of it and dropped out and went on, and they're driving a truck right now and they're making good money, but they're going to bucket list this for their kids. Different approach. Now they already think that they've earned it, but they've been denied something due to someone else's malfeasance. So what I need to do there is approach that in the manner of, okay, so we're different and we're different people now. Over the course of both of them, though, I like to exemplify adults who want to learn as people that have life experience already. So really what we're going to try and do is just put terms to things you already do. And it kind of, that seems to soften some of the blows and the approaches when we come through. In terms of like a victim family, that's a completely different approach, because in that sense, these people they're of course grieving. There's some level of PTSD involved with what's going on. No matter the length of time in between the loss and the current moment. And so I actually through the American Society of Suicidology, I've got been certified in psychological autopsies, which is an interviewing technique for survivors. And what they usually use for is to determine, why someone may have decided to take their own life. But it's really helpful in cold case usage when you have to talk to a family and approach them about, like, the more information that we can find out about a victim, for example, the more light can be shed on why they were where they were, and what they could have been encountering at that point. And so through the psychological autopsy, it's not standardized like an interview checklist sort of thing. It's more of an approach that really is, the hallmark of it is being slow, being sometimes over the course of a year, as you start to break down barriers with this and get to the truth of something. But it kind of just centers on the trustworthiness of the interviewer. And I think that's probably the one thing that connects everything through. It's intent. And so if you can approach someone through your audience analysis and be as trustworthy as possible in their terms, not in your terms, You're inherently trustworthy, but if you can approach them and say, all right, I understand that you've gone through this, this, and this. No, I do. I understand. And I'm not going to force my moral code, my ethical code, whatever, I've decided about the world on you, but we're going to try and get to this other point. Then it's generally about them. And I think that's probably the hardest thing for most people, like you said before, taking that self out and being as clinical as possible, because what I believe is absolutely immaterial. The hardest thing for me is to deal with, people that are incarcerated for child exploitation crimes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have too many problems with murderers. I can get over that pretty quickly, but the child exploitation and the sexual assaults are the ones that kind of eat at me. And so it's a process of me of being clinical and taking back in the me out. And we don't have to approve or endorse an act in order to communicate someone that's committed an act. And so I have to remind myself at times like that. It doesn't happen, of course, with victim families. It's just a matter of being as respectful as possible to them. But really, clinical is it, because you're going to ask someone who's lost a loved one some very difficult questions, some incredibly difficult, something really personal questions. And you'll tell them, of course, before you start that there's going to be some personal questions involved, but they're going to get really personal. And being able to manage the blowback from that and staying consistent and taking that emotion out of that as well. So as much the audience analysis is important, our emotional response to when people give us answers is important as well.
Yeah, it's extremely important. There's so many, I'm going to use the word again, important things that you said in that answer, from even just connecting with people in a way to help whatever experience they have, help them see it as momentum towards wherever they're going. So it's put new phrases to it, new titles to it, that life experience. We're going to build momentum in a new direction based on what we've already done. The concept of aligning ideas with their self-image, people like me shouldn't have this opportunity. Okay, well, let's flip it. So now we can align what your self-image is to this new direction that we want to go. So important. I love how you said you don't have to approve of what somebody did in order to be able to talk with them. And I know I'm paraphrasing you a little bit there. It's been a couple of years since I've had to sit in the interviewer seat myself. People would ask frequently, how can you talk to somebody with so much respect who did something to a child, did something to a woman, or even, just stole a whole bunch of money from a company? That was really easy, but it just stole a bunch of money from a company. And for me, I was able to separate the outcome from the emotion. So I have a job to do here. My job is to get the truth, gather as many facts as I can. And if I do a good enough job doing that, then the punishment will take care of itself. And some of the examples you gave, maybe the punishment isn't as severe as I would want it to be, but given the situation, it's the maximum that it can be. So my job is to collect the truth that can get there. But it took me a while and some great mentors to be able to put myself in that position. And I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with. And the examples you gave are at the outer edge of morally reprehensible. Sometimes we even run into, well, somebody lied to me. How can I talk to them and not be mad? Well, dude, everybody lies. What planet are you from? Why are you taking it so personal? So to take it from the morally reprehensible, even back to some more of the everyday things that we just might shrug our shoulders at, how do you work with people to help them compartmentalize their own emotions in order to be able to connect with people, to talk about the truth, and even, dare I say, bond after unspeakable, morally reprehensible or other acts that we disagree with may have taken place?
Great. So no one generally walks in to just have a conversation with somebody. There's an end. There's a goal involved for both sides. The victim family wants to get some kind of resolution or feel like someone's hearing them. The interviewer or me, I want to get as much information as I can to try and help. The student wants to learn. The teacher wants to teach. And so the taking it back to that goal set is usually really helpful. Most of the time, when people don't feel they can communicate with one another is when their goal sets are at odds, and they think they're or at least they assume they perceive they're at odds. And when you feel that someone doesn't want the same thing that you want, then it's real easy to pick up on whatever negative aspects of their behavior or their approach is doable that time. It's really bad because as humans, we make what's called a fundamental attribution error. Mm-hmm. And it's super easy to fall into that pattern all the time. If we're talking right now and, you look away and scratch your ear, I'm like, oh, Michael is bored. He's bored with me. That is a personality flaw. And in all reality, you're just itches. So you scratch. I mean, whatever happens is what happens. But we take that one step because we make, as humans, that fundamental error in attributing behavior to personality. And so what we have to do, though, when we're being communicative and trying to get these things across, whatever the goal set is keep that goal in mind. And if that goal is in mind, it's easier to stay separated. So as a forensic interviewer, you needed to get to the truth. And whatever, that was your goal. And their goal was probably to hide the truth from you. So your goals were at odds. And that makes it incredibly difficult for you not to make these fundamental attribution errors with this behavior. So the training, I would assume, is just pretty intense and takes you back into that clinical stage again. And so if we all, to get this down into a slightly less verbose thing, if we can take this all down to accepting the responsibility and the onus for the effectiveness of the communication and the effectiveness of the outcome, that's when we're adaptive and we don't have to rely on somebody else's adaptivity. And that's it. It's important. It feels like it's all one-sided, and yeah, it is. It absolutely is. It's one-sided. Most people, like you indicated before, aren't going to have this sort of clarity with communication, this sort of clarity with audience. And since you do, now it's you. You're the one that's responsible for the effective finish to whatever you're trying to do.
I love how you said that. Take responsibility for the effectiveness of the communication. There's clients that I've worked with over the years, and I don't say it that way. I'm not stealing it from you, but we'll say something like, well, adapt to their style, more or less, right? And then they say, well, I shouldn't have to do that. Well, you're right. You shouldn't have to do that, but you do. Like, if the outcome is important enough to you, if the relationship is important enough to you, if there's something here we can achieve together, then yes, taking responsibility for this communication experience falls on us in order to achieve those outcomes. So I really like how you said that. And the way you talk about that fundamental attribution error, it's so true in many ways. I do feel like the way it shows up the most is like the example you gave, the nonverbal communication. He scratched his nose. He's lying. No, there's 4 inches of pollen on his truck. He's not lying. Come on, like, use your situational awareness. And earlier you talked about balancing, was it behaviorism and structurism? Did I get the 2 words right? My bias, I guess, there's certainly value in both, right? If my situational awareness is open and I'm evaluating the totality of what I'm seeing and hearing in the context of the situation, there's lots of intelligence to get from the nonverbal and verbal communication. But if my situational awareness is low, I could be misleading myself big time there.
Less in the moment situational awareness, but it goes back. So like, where'd someone grow up? It's environmental structural. So because if someone comes in and they grew up in deep dark Alabama and they don't have an accent, you're like, oh, okay, well, this person took great pains to remove this accent for some reason. And so therefore, you can layer the information as it comes in, and it gets the profiling, but really, whatever information we can glean is super important. We're all investigators in that point.
Yeah. And I know, to me, I guess I'd probably be happy if my son didn't grow up to be an investigator for any number of reasons, but I would want everybody around me to have that investigator's mentality. Like, I'm gathering as much intelligence as I can. I'm being as observant as possible. I'm asking myself, why this, why that? How does that dot connect? Where's that trigger? What could it mean? And then that, I guess, synthesizing might be the right word. As I synthesize that information, hopefully I'm drawing stronger conclusions and making better decisions. And you're right. I feel like that word profiling gets thrown around a whole lot, but it's intelligence gathering.
It is.
And that's really what it comes down to.
Make a decision. And so whether that decision is how best to approach somebody who's suffering a trauma, or how best to approach somebody who you think may have committed a crime, however it works, it kind of goes hand in hand. And so I'll always say this, barring mental disease or defect, because there's the pathological aspects of everything. Someone's got a chemical imbalance, they're going to act
Mhm.
not in their right mind, literally. So, but it's really super powerful to be that observant. And then when you approach it from from the behavioral aspect, so this structuralism affects someone's behavior, then he's like, oh, why is this person always yelling at people? Well, because this, and this, it's painfully obvious. And it's a human thing to take that personally too. When we see like aberrant behavior, we take it personally because we wouldn't act in that manner. And again, it's not about us. That onus again is off. And he said that someone shouldn't have to be responsible for the conversation. I would argue that everyone should. That's it. Like, you should be, just because they're not, you should. It's like getting an award when you pay your child support. Well, you're supposed to pay your child support. No one needs an award.
Yeah, congratulations for doing the thing that you promised you would do to take care of the people who need it the most. Well done. I agree. I thought that was a great line, taking the responsibility and seeing how the structurism, if I'm saying this right, feeds the behaviorism. Like that cycle is spinning and one contributes to the other. So
it's a circle too. Yeah.
Yeah. So that way we can put that bigger puzzle together. You talked earlier about the perceived trustworthiness of the interviewer. Mm-hmm. And that's probably something we could break down for an hour alone. When you're going into these different settings, I mean, if you're going into a prison, I would imagine that right out of the gate, you're not trusted. And that's something that has to be earned over time.
Well, it's interesting. You kind of are. So
Really?
I'm not a CO.
Okay.
I'm the professor.
Yeah.
So I don't have to be there. And since I'm not required to be there and I am there, then there's a level of trust that is kind of inherent. It also works out. It kind of works. It's the weirdest thing. It works both ways. I'm like the safest human being on the planet when I'm in a prison. If anything happens to me, the person that did it is literally probably going to be dead that evening because they just ruined it for everybody.
Yeah.
So, but here's a great example. I teach cops too.
Yep.
So I'll get a class of cops and they're in their degree completion programs and they're in their 40s, they're mid-career, they're not new. And they'll always be asking, like, how come people hate us? Okay, how come people hate you? Well, it goes to perception. And they think like, we're here to serve and protect. Like, I know you are. But you're a closed system. No one knows how you work on the inside, right? Well, no. We can't tell them that. Well, you could, but you decided not to. It's a thing you've decided not to do because you are keeping this and you don't deal with people outside of the industry. All your friends and family are pretty much within this industry. So it's a closed system that not a lot of people know about. It's a closed system that not a lot of people know about that has power over the people that whether what your intent is immaterial. The power is there. So that power dynamic is different. And so if someone doesn't know, really what you're all about, you got a uniform and you have power over them, sometimes absolute power, in certain situations, then they're going to not trust you. The perception is going to not be one of trustworthiness, depending on where they grew up structurally. So you get a bunch of pushback when you try and ask about a crime that happened, for example, in a neighborhood that's routinely, powerless to do police, and there's generations and generations of not being able to trust a police department, whether real or not. It's immaterial because perception is truth, and that's your results in that's why this particular group doesn't like you, and it's kind of a click when it registers and like we don't talk about ourselves, we are very closed off. Yeah, and you haven't taken the responsibility to communicate your intent. And so where are we left with? And the same thing will happen in a prison system too. The difference with the prison system is that group is inherently vulnerable. I mean, at the mercy of everything. There's zero locus of control. They can't even decide like when to leave class, like most colleges can. So the way to bridge that gap with them is generally to give them something to choose. Like, what do you want to do today? What? Like, what do you want to do? It's up to you. And so that's their perception of you changes in that sense too.
That's a great point. I'm writing it down so I don't forget it. I'm not ignoring you or bored with you, I promise, as I break eye contact. Here we go again. But giving people something to choose.
Yep.
Like, you probably showed up that day with a lesson plan, and yeah, you could go a couple of different ways for sure. But I'd be willing to bet most of the time, no matter what they choose, leads you to the lesson plan you were probably going to do anyway.
Yeah.
So now they feel like they're in control. They finally had control over something that day, which then sets you up to do the thing you wanted to do that they're now more receptive of. So huge opportunity there. That thought of open and closed systems, I think, is really important too. And we can even take it out of law enforcement for a moment and just put it into business. Like, how many times do the frontline people, they might know what their managers are dealing with, but they don't know what the middle level of management are dealing with, the upper level. They don't know what's being talked about in boardrooms, conference rooms, meeting rooms. And so many times the thought process is, well, we can't share that. Dude, you could share 90% of it. And not only would it not hurt, it would help. So the next time you walk by someone looking at your phone, they don't think, well, that guy's a jerk. He doesn't care about me. They think, oh, well, actually, it's the end of quarter, and these are all the things that are going on. He's probably focused on that. So that concept of open and closed systems, I think, is a great point that you brought up. Just kind of casually, and I know you talked about it, but kind of casually, like, yeah, I teach prisoners and cops. It's probably not a whole lot of people that do both. Like, most people probably tend to go towards one or the other. And I know a lot of what you do, I shouldn't say I know. I have the perception that a lot of what you do is more academic, course related.
Right.
But I'm sure within that, you have the opportunity to share a little bit about what you've learned about the police to help prisoners, and share a little bit about what you've learned about prisoners to help the police. So how do you bridge without breaking confidentiality with either group or setting somebody up to get in trouble or fail, but just to help them make better connections, which I believe, just from talking to you, is probably something that motivates you. How do you take the lessons you've learned to cross-educate both groups?
They hate to hear that they're more similar than they think. Because we're dealing with adults, first and foremost, adults doing a new thing.
Yeah.
And so if you got this, whether you were told you never could do it or you avoided it for your whatever it is, you're doing this new thing. But in both of them, at times have a real difficult time with lateral thinking, mainly because their lives are so rigid and so rules based. This is what happens here, and this is what happens here, and this is what happens here. So being able to think across, disciplines, for example, or think outside of a box to move in a different direction is and decision making is sometimes very difficult for both of them. One group doesn't want to make the wrong decision because they don't want to, be chastised. The other group doesn't want to make the wrong decision because they've already made a bunch of wrong decisions, and another one will just put them in segregation for 2 years. So it's really similar in that sense. They also, have these belief systems that are strange, and so not strange. Strange is the wrong word. Belief systems that are rigid as well. And I'll talk to a group of officers about they come along a neighborhood and there's a bunch of guys in hoodies in front of a gas station and they roust them. And I'm like, okay, why'd you do that? Because they're probably going to start trouble. Like, okay, based on what? Because that's the type of people that start trouble. Okay, like you got this belief system here. This neighborhood is on state aid, has been for years. There's lots of crime in here. Like, okay, for generations, what if the social structure in this neighborhood is about going to jail, and if you don't go to jail, you don't have any social power, or you have to engage in this activity or you're going to be ostracized from your in-group. Like, well, they should just stop and go to college. Like, okay. Invariably, I'll ask an officer, what'd your dad do? It's a cop. What's your grandfather do? It's a cop. What if you wanted to be a baker? No way. It wasn't going to happen. Like, okay. And here we are. You just have the same rigidity. It's a different structure. And so I think the thing that gets to everybody at that point is like, all right, now we can look and see that not everyone has that same context that I have. And it's not so easy for someone to just change a life the easy way. Because, I grew up in rural Michigan and, in the 80s, 70s and 80s. And, you went to high school and I think the counselors were paid by colleges because all they said was college is the only thing. That's the only thing. It's the only route. It's all you got to do. Like, well, I guess that's what I'm going to do. And if I decided I wanted to be a musician, that would have gone over poorly. and I wouldn't have done it because I was going to be afraid of being ostracized from my in-groups. So the police in-groups, our neighborhood in-groups, this fear of being socially cast out is what drives most. That's a big motivator for a lot of things. You'll talk to people in prison that simply engaged in the behavior that was happening around them. That's all they did. And it's completely socially accepted. Is it illegal? Yeah, but those aren't laws for us. Those are laws for those other type of people. You're gonna go to jail. Yeah, I know. It's just this in there. And then the police officer family, you're gonna be a cop because that's what we do. And this, you can't do anything else. You're not going to be like those animals. And so these holding on to these things and viewing the world only through our myopic lens, our own perception is really the thing that kind of breaks down those barriers and how I approach them both.
That was an awesome illustration. And I love how you broke down how on either side of that, in many ways, the decision tree that they walk through is identical. It just led them to opposite ends of the same spectrum. So how many times in life do we look at somebody and say, I'm nothing like them? When in reality, we're almost identical to them, but based on the environment we were in, we ended up making a different decision, or ended up maybe not even made a different decision, but ended up at a different end point based on a similar track that we went through. And maybe it's an overstatement, but one of the things I like talking about is the universality of the human experience, like how much we all have in common. And I truly believe that, reflecting on my investigative career, well over 90% of the people I interviewed would have made a different decision under different circumstances. That doesn't absolve them of accountability, responsibility. They got to own the cost. I'm not taking any of that away, but just being honest about it. Had they been in a different situation, they would have made a different choice. And if we ignore that, then we're ignoring such an important factor of what it means to be a human being. You dropped in groups as you were talking about it. For me, and I don't have the psychology degree, but I feel like the power of in groups and out groups is often under-discussed, underappreciated, underutilized as a bonding tool or an understanding tool. So just the example you gave, they went along with the behavior of everybody else. Well, they're an adult. They should have made their own decision. Really? When there's 25 dudes hanging out together, one guy is going to say, no, that's not for me, and walk away. Like, again, that's not how human beings work. So if you could kind of help people understand through your work inside the prison system, outside the prison system, the power of understanding in groups and out groups and how it affects people's decision-making process to either go along or automatically resist, even when logically it makes no sense.
So most people, there's very few people that will see a bad idea happening within their groups and then actively resist said bad idea. Because we need that human connection. If we're looking like, I don't know how familiar you are with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but everything's about need fulfillment, motivation and need fulfillment. And if we get to this point where we are, we've all eaten, we've all been fed, we can breathe, and we feel pretty safe. The belongingness need is something that every human has. We have to belong to some kind of group. It's how we see like the rise of like online incel groups now, because they've all found each other, and now they're this powerful little group, large group online. But everyone has this groups, whether it's your family or some school friends or your neighborhood or your football team, or like how often do we see like collegiate sports team engage in like horrible things as a group, because it's what we do, and it's super important to be part of that group. And if you're ostracized from that group and you're shunned from your in group, then you have no support network. That's something that most people just can't handle. And it's also something that most people take so much for granted that they can't imagine it being that bad. And that's where we get to this idea of, why don't you just, step away? You're all going to rob a bank. You could have said no and told the cops. Like, I could have said no and told the cops. Okay. And then what would happen to me? My family wouldn't talk to me. My mom wouldn't talk to me. My friends would no longer talk to me. I would be left alone, and we fear loneliness. We desperately fear loneliness. And so that kind of out group is it being outed from your in group is something that's just so what do I want to call it? Um, Language is failing me right now. Well, we avoid it. We avoid it completely because it feels so absolutely terrible. Interesting. Like if you look in a prison setting, so you go into a prison setting, and when someone gets thrown into prison, they don't know anybody for the most part. So it's real interesting to see how this works. And there's this theory called identification theory. Before I tell you how it works in prison, I'm going to tell you how it worked on Planet of the Apes. So 1968, Planet of the Apes is shot. And there's this giant scene with chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, and humans. And hundreds of extras are in there, and they're all dressed up in different ways, but everyone's a human being underneath, right? So they shoot the scene, and then they break for lunch. And without being told, the chimpanzees sat with the chimpanzees, the orangutans sat with the orangutans, the gorillas, and the humans, because of this concept called identification theory, which if we see someone that looks like us, talks like us, maybe committed the same crime as us, we tend to gravitate toward them because we think they're going to have a similar background to what we have. It's how we divide, by race and gender. When things happen, when we're in a prison, it's usually by race first, because by race, you can generally assume that someone's had the same experiences as you, and they're going to get you, and more likely allow you into your in group. And then they break down by crime. So there's the African American guys, there's the murders over here, and some of the drug crimes over there, and then you got some of the white guys over here, and they got the drug drivers over there that are by race. Then there's this very strange out group, and this out group that's they're together because of no one else will have them. So, and that's like the men transitioning to women, child exploitation crimes, and oddly enough, serial killers. They kind of get put into this weird, and this is an anecdotal example. I don't have hard facts on this, but this is what I've noticed. And they're in this group together, so they're a friend group. They're an in group because no one else would have them. So they form this in group because they need to. Do they like each other? Probably not. Can someone be completely abhorrent at what someone else has done? Yeah, they can. But it's preferable to not having anybody and being by yourself. And so that's, an odd thing. And there was an interesting thing where I walked into a class once, and a guy, he just right off the bat, before hello, he told me that he had a drunk driving charge. I'm like, oh, okay, that's great. Hi, I'm Dave. Well, we'll get to that later, I suppose. And then when I go through and I look everybody up later, he's really in on a child exploitation charge. And he was using that to be in an in group that wasn't ostracized. So I'm like, oh, yeah, that's a way around it, of course. But yeah, we don't want it. We have to be in these groups, even if that group is filled with like miscreants and horrible people that you think are awful. They've done terrible things. They've allowed you in. Better than being by yourself.
That's a great point, and something that I think even as a parent, I have a young son. Who's he hanging out with in school? Now he's in elementary school, so let's be honest about the groups we're choosing from here. But even sometimes looking at, where is he at? Where are some of his interests? Where are some of his ability levels compared to some of his friend groups and others? And everybody's kids and growing up, and at this age, nothing is a kid's fault. It's all their parents, their families, and all this stuff. So keeping that in mind, but even just trying to be aware and think ahead of where could some of this be going, and how do we instill enough of a confident, independent streak in individuals to try to help them make some better decisions in some of those, I'm just going to use the word coupling yourself in a group type decision-making processes. You talked about a lot of very interesting things in there, but you said one thing kind of early on about these rising online groups. And I believe that I believe one of the many things you speak on is like recruitment of fringe groups and things like that. And I don't know a whole lot about it. Sometimes I feel like if I'm watching a terrorist group or a street gang or like a fringe religious group that maybe they're not committing any crimes, or maybe even just, this is going to be a terrible way to say it, like the kids that sit at that one lunch table over there, like sometimes the way that they're all like seeking out new people feels the same to me from an outside perspective. So could you take a couple of minutes and help us understand how, I think fringe groups is the words that you use, so I don't want to misquote you, but how these groups attract and recruit members?
So attracting and recruiting is a little different. So we roll it back. The reason people seek out these sort of groups or these sort of in groups is because we're dealing with need fulfillment. And most of the time, when someone finds a fringe group, it's because they feel disenfranchised, whether it's real or not. It's their perception that they've been disenfranchised.
Yep.
So you've got like a bunch of like 20-year-old suburban white guys who, are going to decide to go shoot up a school because no one will date them. They're not disenfranchised. They have, everything that logically that they could have. They have family support and money, and they have food and opportunities, but they feel that something's missing. So this idea of need fulfillment goes kind of the heart of it. Whether it's a need for justice for a terrorist organization, or you believe that you're being held down by some minority, and you go to like a white supremacist organization, whatever it is usually the recruitment isn't as important as why someone's looking to begin with. The recruitment's always going to be there. It's like the Uncle Sam, we want you. You'll find them, and you're going to type some things online. You're going to be looking first. They're not going to go find you. You're not going to be sitting in the grocery line and someone's going to walk up and say, can I give you the secrets of my cult? It's just, it's not going to work. Like, you're going to seek them out. Excuse me. So, but we look at something like the best terrible term. An interesting example is like Jim Jones in Jonestown. So we started the People's Republic, the People's Church in the 60s in San Francisco. And he was taking in people and helping people that other churches were casting off. So heroin addicts, single Black women, homeless people, the people that the other churches didn't have time with because, of course, there wasn't enough money at that point. And he was bringing them all in and fulfilling needs, sometimes physical needs, sometimes locking someone in a room for 2 weeks as they get clean through the DTs, and no one else is willing to do this. And so as he does this, people are becoming more and more beholden to him as a person, and he's fulfilling all of these needs. And eventually you'll see where you can't see a need without this person being able to fulfill it, or you can't see a need in the world without your ideology of hate being able to fulfill it. And so it starts with this disenfranchisement, whether real or perceived. And that's kind of the scary part about it. You look at Columbine, for example, school shootings. Before we got on here, Florida State, a university just had, a school shooter come through. And to a person, these people are disenfranchised. They're engaging in this behavior as this power dynamic because they want something out of it. Their needs are not being fulfilled in some manner. And instead of providing, safe and reliable and easily accessible ways to take care of those, we simply don't as a society. And so these fringe groups and the real dangerous ones, all the way to the minorly annoying ones that we deal with, they're all about fulfilling somebody's need. And when that need is fulfilled, then they become an acolyte for that particular organization.
It's a good way to draw it all together. So, which leads me to the flip side of that. Let's say that somebody listening has somebody in their life who sees themselves as disenfranchised and might be interested. And let's even stay away from the real, like, bad ones, violent ones, but maybe there's some fringe groups that are more, I think used mildly annoying might have been the term that you used, but we'll come down the escalation grade here a little bit. From your experience, I would imagine if we tell somebody you're wrong, you're not seeing it right, those people are bad, we're really just pushing them towards that group. We're not actually pulling them from it. So what would be your recommendation on how to try to connect with somebody to bring them back to the good side, if you will, if we feel drawn through disenfranchisement towards some of these groups?
That's where we start the dialogues. We go back to what we talked about to begin with. Assess why they're there. What do they feel disenfranchised about? Is it because girls won't talk to them? Okay. Is it because they're hanging with a bunch of kids that do drugs because the football team, picked on them? I mean, whatever it happens to be. And if we can have that dialogue and you do that careful audience analysis, even if it's your own kid, try and see things from that different perspective. If we approach like our kids, for example, from how we grew up, it's not going to work. We just talked about Florida State. I was worried about tornadoes and a nuclear bomb, things that were just abstract. Like it could be a thing, but I didn't turn on the TV and see something happen to someone who looked like me. And so that's, that's kind of like the perspective we have to take. So we have to get back and see the context that we're dealing with, and then respect the choice. Don't agree with the choice. Don't condone the choice. Respect the choices they've made. Ask them about those choices so you can understand more. People are more than willing to talk about the things they think they're in love with. It's their passions. And once you understand the reasoning behind it, then you can kind of formulate a plan for maybe counteracting it, or slowly turning someone from reliance on a different thing, or presenting an absolutely better alternative from their perspective. And that's really kind of the hard part. So a lot of young people get wrapped up in different groups, and it's easy because they're actively searching to have needs fulfilled. And if we're not paying attention to that, then they can be lost, to us. And, even, and you said your kids in grade school, and that's where the hand-me-down home ideologies start to take root in grade school. So you kind of see the groups that are pertaining to. But when I grew up in a literally the Klan capital of the Midwest. And not a great place. It was not, the most, and I didn't know any better, of course. But I decided I wanted to go into theater as a kid. I'm like, that looks like fun. I think that would be a lot of fun. And so I expressed this idea to friends and family, and just got shot down. And at one point was like, physically, assaulted because of my desire to go act on a stage. Like, I think the time Christopher Reeve was my hero, I think.
Superman.
Yeah, I mean, it's a solid one. And so that changed the whole course of everything. And I went into sports. I didn't want to, but I didn't want to be outgrouped. I didn't want to be outgrouped. And I chose to go into this. And it was probably, it would have changed the course of a direction, what have you. But if someone would have listened for a minute and asked me, why would you want to do that? I mean, it really asked, not, like, why would you want to do that? Then, and I could articulate it, then they could have, worked through that. But really, that's kind of it right there. We have to, look at the context and respect the decision, and be inquisitive, be the investigator, because it's important. It's important to them, and they got there for a reason. Figure out that reason.
Man, that's so beautifully said. And it gets back to what you were talking about earlier. I don't have to agree with what they did to accept it in order to be able to work with them. And that's, it's, at least in my experience, it's easier to do that with people you don't know. It's easier to people to do that you're going to go home, or if I'm a traveling investigator, I'm probably never going to see this person again. So I can lock in for the duration of this conversation and clock out after, and it's done. But for the people we love the most, that we've invested the most time in, that we have the closer relationships in, it's difficult, and especially when it violates our expectations. So now the knee-jerk reaction could be, what the hell's wrong with you? Why would you ever want to do that? Absolutely not. When it's just pushing them further away and further towards the thing we don't want them to do, to say, cool, all right, tell me why, walk me through, what's so interesting, what are you going to do next, where's that going to lead you? Now that gets them to open up and talk. And to your point, if you listen carefully enough, do the audience analysis, whether they explicitly say it or not, the motivation should come out, the fears should come out, the goals should come out. And now if it's theater or sports, for the love of God, go do what makes you happy. But if it's joining a fringe group or playing sports or theater, we'll do theater instead of sports. Well, theater's clearly the better choice in this option. So now, based on what you tell me, not in one conversation, but over a series of conversations, can I find a way that theater addresses the underlying needs, fears, motivations that you have that's pushing you in this other direction? So like your prisons example, you can feel like you made the choice along the way. And I feel like it's hard for people to wrap their arms around that approach because it's counterintuitive. But to your point, it works so much better.
Yeah, it's all because we hold on to our perspective in our ethical and our moral, things. The worst thing that anyone ever said to me was, you weren't raised like that.
Yeah.
Like what? It was just a decision,
Yeah.
benign. And so now you see, if you do things like that, you're not only making the need, not fulfilling that need, but you're making the other option look so much more attractive.
Mm-hmm.
They don't yell at me. They don't question me. I just got to burn down a church or two. Things start to become more reasonable. Things that you would never think of before become more reasonable because, well, this group that loves me is the thing. It's so there's an old when we have like Mormon missionaries and Jehovah's Witnesses come out and people go door to door. Ideally, the church leadership expects them to get rejected. They wants them to get rejected because when they come back home, then they're further into the belief system because we're the ones that love you. We're the ones that understand you. They don't really get, we try and help them, but they're not us. Only us are us. And so it's a bigger hug when someone returns after that kind of rejection. And so, we don't want to do that. We absolutely don't want to do that.
No, was it social judgment theory? Here I am saying that to the forensic psychologist, but if somebody has an idea, the more closely it's tied to their self-image, the more we try to rationally persuade them away from it, we're actually pushing them towards it. It's spot on. I've really appreciated the conversation, man. We just ate up an hour and I didn't even realize it. Easy. So many great thoughts. I thank you for sharing it. For the people that we didn't even get into jury selection and all these other things that we were going to talk about. For people who are interested, they want to get in touch with you, continue to learn from you, your experiences. Maybe they want you to come in and work with their group in their prison or their university, their law enforcement department. How should they reach out to connect with you?
You can just go to hayescriminology.com and all the contact info is right there.
Awesome. I'll pull out the contact info. I'll put the links in the show notes. We'll make sure everybody's got it. Man, it's been great meeting you. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing everything you did today. Thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. Anytime.
Stay safe, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
David, thank you for an awesome conversation. I really appreciate the time you shared today. Thank you for sharing your stories and your examples. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot. I hope everybody listening did as well. I thought the point you made that we don't have to like what somebody did in order to be able to have a conversation with them is extremely important and a huge takeaway for everybody. That's a great call out. Another equally as important call out is it's important for us to accept the responsibility for the outcomes and the effectiveness of our communications. Nobody's more responsible for it than we are. We're going to create the outcomes. It's our responsibility. I like how you talked about avoiding those fundamental attribution errors as well. So much more. It was a great conversation. Thank you very much. And of course, thank you to everybody that took the time to listen to another conversation. We really do appreciate you all being here today. Thank you so much. Please, before you head out, take a moment, like the show, share the show, subscribe to the show. Please comment, leave us your feedback. We would love to hear it. And also check out our sponsors. Head over to humantel.com and enter the code INQUASIVE25 for 25% off their best-in-class training to develop the skill set necessary to recognize what people are likely thinking and feeling by identifying shifts in their emotions through shifts in their facial expressions and nonverbal communication. All the research is there, all the training's there, the code's INQUASIVE25 over at humantel.com. For the professional interviewers, head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can get all your questions answered about the International Association of Interviewers. When and where do they meet? What type of education do they provide? What additional resources, networking? It's all there. That's also where you can learn about the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation, how you qualify, how you prepare and pass the exam, what it can mean for you and your career moving forward over at certifiedinterviewer.com. And finally, please check out inquasive.com while you're online to learn more about the programs our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and beyond when they are looking to understand how to apply the communication techniques necessary to uncover hidden value in every conversation. We appreciate you being here week after week. Thank you so very much. Please stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.